Hello, welcome to this podcast. You are here with us on The Geeketeers, starring Jordan from TheBlueShifting and Steven, our resident, I don't know, perfectionist Star Wars master, Jedi Knight himself.
Hello.
Okay, radio voice. I don't know if it came across as smooth and creamy or dark and creepy, but we'll keep going.
How about smooth and creepy?
Smooth and creepy, I like it. I'll have to remember that one. Alright, so I want to open up because probably the most recent news within the recording of this podcast is Force Awakens just opened up in China. Did you know, I don't know, have you been following that story at all?
Yes, I have, because there's been a whole lot of articles coming about all of the records that the movie is breaking, and then there's some counter articles coming out and saying, well, it hasn't actually broken these records yet because you have to adjust for inflation and ticket price and yada yada yada. But I'm still just impressed. Yeah, because a lot of these records that it's breaking were from the movie's entire run of ticket sales, and The Force Awakens is breaking them at 20 days, having not even opened in China yet. So, that's all those naysayers out there. I think it's going to beat them quite handily. But anyway, yeah, very cool.
It's kind of one of those, I think at this point it's more of the inevitable. People are kind of just well, I'm still gonna say a voice in here, and plus honestly, it's a marketing campaign. I mean, if you want to get clicks on, you're gonna get clicks on saying something that's really unpopular because people are gonna be like, what? How could they say that?
Right.
It's kind of a movie critic. A movie critic is not a good critic if he's only talking about the good points. Our podcast would be really pointless if we just talked about why the movie was awesome and didn't talk about why it has its flaws.
How dare you say Star Wars had flaws?
Oh, well, the internet will say that. There are people out there who do that. It's just...
I know.
I don't know. Some people just don't understand. They don't understand, being able to critique and talk about things. But yeah, so let's see. I think I just saw the report here that it is reported that in its first day of opening, it made $39.9 million. I'm also looking at this article here. It says that in a theater, where was it? In Beijing, they have a theater that shows it every half hour. So they got this a chain of theaters rotating, and every 30 minutes a new showing starts.
Oh gosh,
that's impressive. And
that's a lot.
China's gonna be one of those things where I imagine that there's a lot of people who have a hard time getting access to a cinema. So yeah, I mean, maybe their first day isn't the incredible levels that we saw on our first day, but for China that's good, and I think China is gonna rumble for a long time of just constant high box office sales.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna be very interested to see how it does in China because, having lived in Taiwan for a couple of years over there, it's interesting because they're not very big into Star Wars in Taiwan. And for those who aren't familiar, Taiwan is it's an island pretty close to Taiwan and Japan, kind of over there. The rest of the world and China thinks they own it, but the U.S. and Taiwan recognize its independence, so it's a weird political situation. But anyway, yeah, their culture over there, they'd tell me, I asked them why they weren't all that into Star Wars, and they'd tell me it's not realistic enough. And then they turn around and they just love anime and Harry Potter, and I'm just like, all right, I don't understand.
Well, okay. Hey, I'll make a plug for anime at the very least. I'm definitely not a master of the subject, but I am a big fan and do a lot of reviews of anime now. And anime, although it is cartoony and has its weird bizarro physics most of the time, you can find some anime that are very realistic, where they strictly adhere to the laws of physics. Those tend to be the more grittier and I guess more mysterious and maybe even the horror elemental type of stories. But if you look, you can find anime that is realistic. So I can kind of say they might know that, but most anime does not qualify.
Well, I think part of it too is anime is a huge part of their culture over there.
Oh yeah,
you can't really go anywhere without seeing it immediately. So, but yeah, it's interesting to me. So another thing about that too is I don't believe the original trilogy was released in China ever. And I think that also kind of contributes to it. Now, the prequel trilogy, episodes 1, 2, and 3, was, but they don't even have Chinese dubbing. Now, they do for Cantonese, which is disappointing to me because I want to see the Mandarin, but...
Make the Mandarin.
Yeah. So I'm hoping, the new ones might have it. I'm really hoping. Because, part of their culture, when they watch American movies, most of the time it'll just have subtitles. They won't even do the dubbing at all. So going to the theater has these gigantic subtitles at the bottom, and I don't know. It's just interesting, different culture, and so I'm kind of excited to see how it really does in China.
Yeah. Well, I mean, pretty good, and I like how like when we're talking all these statistics and record breaking, a lot of it's really interesting because like the ones they compare it to mostly right now is Avatar, because it was the biggest box office of all time, and it's like now Star Wars is kind of running the mile with that one. And one of the big arguments was that Avatar was released in China at the same time as released everywhere else, at least most of the Western countries. So it's like that was a pretty big deal. The fact that Star Wars was competing with their rates of income and box office sales before China is really quite a statement to make.
Yeah, and that's what I'm just super impressed at. Now, honestly, like, did I think it was a completely just drop jaw amazing movie? No, I thought it was really good. But kind of the same with Avatar. I guess I never really saw it personally, so disclaimer there. I have not seen that movie. I know Stone Me or whatever, but from who I talked to, they always say it was good, but it wasn't their favorite, and so it's always interesting to me how it got so much sales. I
Hype,
don't.
man. Like, hype is a powerful tool in modern
Yeah,
media and modern
hype
marketing.
marketing, yeah. So it's just interesting, but I still haven't seen it.
Yeah. I still want to see them. I actually still haven't seen the movie a second time. I'm thinking we're gonna try and go. There's a new theater around us that has like those like recliner seats, like the cushy seats that you get in, and you can like order food that gets delivered to you during the movie. I'm really excited to try. I've always wanted to be in a theater like that. Well, by the way, for you listeners, and this is our second podcast, and you might notice that we're actually down a man already. So he's not gone forever. My brother just was not available at the time, but he's really thrilled because he actually has he's going to be upgrading his equipment soon. So he said last time he was like sounded like he was underwater. He didn't like that, but he should have that fixed in the coming weeks, and so hopefully we'll have his golden silky voice on with us as well, and just improve that quality a little bit. But for tonight, it's just going to be the two of us kind of going back and forth.
Wait.
Now, I have to ask you something, Steven. Were you the one that sent me the Twitter link to the account for Emo Kilo Ren? Or is that someone else?
Oh yeah, I believe that was me that sent you that.
You are my favorite because it has been one of the most entertaining things I have come across in the past year. Like, I actually
Yeah.
have a few quotes I wanted to read if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
All right. So this one came out on Christmas. So this is a parent, a spoof Twitter account for Kylo Ren, and it says, "Uncle Lando said my helmet made me look like a depressed lampshade, and then everyone laughed and high-fived him. I hate this family so much." Oh my gosh. Or current status in a Sarlacc pit, but emotionally. Or Dear Diary, today Hux and I took a quiz to find our Hogwarts houses. He got Slytherin. I got Hufflepuff the first time, but it was a mistake. That one's hilarious because it's totally true. Everyone who takes those quizzes, if you get Hufflepuff, everyone's like, "Oh no, I'm gonna take it again. It was obviously a mistake." No one wants no love for Hufflepuff.
Yep, I'm one of those. I got Hufflepuff, which honestly, like, I'm not too disappointed in, but I was hoping for Ravenclaw. But anyway, that's
Yeah.
beside the
Oh, represent the blue and silver. I was Ravenclaw first time. I was like,
Yeah.
yes, I'm awesome. That was my favorite house too. So I was like, I could roll in Hogwarts. Let's see, and then one last one was one of my favorites. My dad just knocked over my model Death Star and broke it, but he did not apologize. He said people should stop making Death Stars. I'm shaking. It's like it's so beautifully written. It really sounds like just like some emo kid writing in his journal. It's hilarious, and I swear he comes up with a post. I don't know, maybe once every couple days or so. But whoever's behind it, bravo! You really think them through, and a lot of them are fantastic. They make me laugh every time.
Yeah, there's two more that people have opened up too. One of them's called Depressed Darth for Darth Vader, and then there's another one for Luke. I forget what it's exactly called, but the other day, the Luke and the Kylo Ren accounts kind of went back and forth with each other. It was kind of funny.
Yeah,
So
actually,
look it up.
that's how I found the Luke account, and I decided to follow that one. But there's a lot of other ones I actually found too by starting to look for them. Like there's one for Ren and for um like Han Solo, and then Han Solo Dead, and it's like those ones weren't as creative. I thought. Like I was reading a few of their posts, I was just like, this seemed more like someone jumping on the bandwagon, not
I
so
think
much somebody who knows. Huh?
a lot of that's gonna happen since the first one got so popular.
Oh, well, that's the thing. Like, I can almost say in the age of the millennials, I guess that's what we technically are. one of the big
Uh-huh.
things about it is since everyone has such a big presence online, mimickers are one of the most prevalent things out there. I don't know the motivation behind some of these people, but it's actually a big problem. I have some of my YouTube channels that I like follow fairly religiously often complain about the fact that there are people who will like pose as them using pictures that are pretty much exactly the same and figuring out ways to make like titles that look almost the same if not the same by adding like a space or something,
Uh-huh.
and then they'll pretend to be the YouTuber. I don't know, maybe these people kind of get off on just having lots and lots of people following them or something, but it's really obnoxious. Like, it
Mhm.
really makes it difficult because then like some of these people also like the real deal, like the real YouTubers or the real production people can't like get verified on Twitter because they have like dozens of Twitter accounts all claiming to be them. So it's like they can't even say that I'm actually me. It's like
Right.
that's ridiculous.
They're just gonna take like a interview or something on the phone, or I don't know, a visit.
Not even that, like they make it sound like it's a really big ordeal, like a whole
Yeah.
like verification. Like I don't know, maybe they have to take your DNA at this point.
Well, I was verified on Google. That didn't take very much.
Well,
But then again,
no
I'm just
offense,
Joe
Steven, but
Schmo.
I don't know if there's like 20 or so people trying to pretend to be you.
Right.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. Hopefully
But
not. My thoughts on that is our generation's kind of self-entitled. Like we believe, a lot of them believe in participation trophies. Like whether you fail or not, you get a trophy, and so they feel entitled. And so it's like, oh, other people get lots of attention. Well, I deserve that too, just for my ego, even though there's no real point. I don't know. I
oddly
have
and
this.
sadly enough, it sounds like young Anakin Skywalker's attitude in the second and third movies. You know, maybe where we live in the dream. Like,
Uh-huh. So I have this Chrome plugin that I absolutely love called Millennials to Snake People. And
oh no.
basically, what it does, I have so many of these plugins installed that sometimes really confuses me, but it replaces the word millennial on a website with snake person every time it finds it.
That's amazing.
And so it's so funny to read this article and be like, snake people think they can get this now. And it's like, kind of another funny
uh,
story on the subject, not to get too far off Star Wars, but at work I was talking with some coworkers, and on my team we have this man who is like a hardware expert. He was getting a doctorate in chemistry of all things, and then he became like this hardware guru and Linux genius, and that's how he's so good at it, is because he knows the chemistry behind how the hardware works, and it's just so fascinating to hear his
hmm.
take on everything. But he's getting pretty up there, getting close to retirement. But we call him Gandalf because he's just like the smartest guy. And anyway, so we were just talking about things and talking about. I was mentioning how I felt like companies needed to have more loyalty toward their employees and vice versa, instead of treating them as just resources. And he just kind of listened, and then he looked over at me and smiled, and he said, "You're a millennial, aren't you?" And I realized, like, you know what? I guess that is kind of a millennial mindset. I still believe in that, but it made me laugh.
I mean, the only counterpoint I could offer for this, honestly, is the fact that, like, especially when you're heading like a large organization, like with the gaps that happen in like a large group of any people, any type of society or organization that just gets so big, the top people can't relate and be able to instruct and talk to and like get one-on-one with the lower. They have to have, people in between them to kind of do that. And anytime you delegate, you're going to get this dilution. And if one person in there is kind of being like crabby or having a bad day, it's going to like drastically affect the people at the bottom. And so I think the disconnect is the biggest issue. Why is because like when you deal with a lot of people like that, it stops being like Joe and Amber and Sarah and Timmy down there, and it starts being we have 300 employees, but they're only doing so much work. It's like, well, obviously we don't need that many, so the people who are being the least productive, we should probably fire them. It's like, yeah, they
Yeah.
become numbers, and yeah, it's kind of cold, but at the same time, it's like it's really kind of inconceivable to have like higher ups be able to like come down to the level where they can really understand everybody's point of view, and so obviously there's going to be like a dehumanization through that process, which is unfortunate. But
It is, yeah. But that's just kind of my take on why everyone, like you said, kind of thinks they need a slice of the attention, because we all have big egos and it feels good.
yeah, I mean that's kind of what goes through a military, and like I'm gonna try and do this. Like it's like in Star Wars, we look at all these stormtroopers, and like I mentioned last time, like how like it immediately sets the tone by having the stormtroopers like massacre a bunch of civilians because they can't get information from them. And it's like it sounds super harsh and super cold, but if you really are looking at it from an objective military standpoint, honestly, it's a right move. I mean, it's bad to be able to have people getting information that you're looking, because they're looking for critical like information, critical data that is like imperative that they find, and the last thing they need is people finding out that that information is available. And sadly, silencing people is a lot more secure than just bribing them or commanding them to not talk. And so, from a pure military standpoint, like you have to admit that the Empire was efficient, that the First Order is efficient, and like they can do a lot of things because they aren't inhibited by morals. But that very problem is why they're the bad guys.
Uh-huh.
It's just interesting. It's like it's a dynamic of like, because I mean, you look at any type of democracy. I mean, New Republic, current democracy in the United States. That the more freedom and voice that people have, the more just kind of blah you have to deal with. There's a lot of just junk that comes along with that, and it's necessary, but you can almost understand in a very odd way why people would support something like the Empire.
Yeah. Well, and it's all like kind of like you mentioned before, it's all marketing too. I mean, you can spin anything to look how you want it. And so the trick is being able to not be fooled by the marketing and do your research and look in the background.
True, exactly. And speaking of background, I kind of want to talk about, like, I don't know, I almost want to call him Emperor Snoke, or whoever the heck he is, because he's kind of somebody that I think everyone's been clamoring about, and I have been seeing theories and theories upon theories about who this guy is.
Uh-huh. The other day on Facebook, I saw this picture someone posted of a picture of Snoke right next to a picture of Darth Vader with his helmet off.
Oh.
Kind of trying to imply they're the same person because, he has a big old scar on his head in the same place, the skin is the same color, his jaw's kind of deformed in the same place, and I just thought it was kind of ridiculous because we've already seen Anakin as a Force ghost, we've already, he died. It's just like,
well, I don't know. Really... We haven't seen the Disney's release of the re-release of the re-release of the re-release. I mean, who knows what they could change?
Oh, please, no. Luke's gonna take off his helmet. He's gonna have Mickey ears or something.
No!
So, anyway, though, I just thought that was kind of ridiculous. People are thinking, like, oh my goodness, it might be the same person, which I won't say it's not possible because they can do whatever they want now, which I have feelings about. But I don't see it. Anakin died. We saw him as a Force ghost. I think, if anything, I think it's a coincidence, personally. If it is on purpose, I think it's more of kind of a nod to Vader's look more than we're trying to copy Vader. I don't know. I just thought it was funny. People trying to think of every possible thing. It's interesting to read all this stuff going on.
Well, I mean, one big part of it, biology, is kind of against that whole idea. Because, I mean, like, yeah, you can kind of line it up and see the similarities. But, I mean, Snoke obviously has an elongated skull. Yes. And, Vader, as much as he was deformed, is still human. And one of the things that wasn't deformed about him was his, skeleton. So, like, to claim that his biology could change dramatically because he got taken out of his life-saving and life-preserving suit doesn't really add up. So, if they did take that route, it would be absolutely just bizarre.
Now, you could take the whole Voldemort Horcrux route and just say, like, transferred his life force to another body and whatever, but I don't see him doing that.
There's a problem with that, though, because that is in the expanded universe with the Emperor. And that was the one thing I never liked about the expanded universe, was there's a whole series of plot lines that involve the Emperor using clones of himself to, like, transmute his own consciousness into and attain, like, eternal life through. It's just like, that makes no sense, because that goes against everything, first of all, that we know about clones. Because a clone would be its own person. And then, even if he could do that, it just, I don't know. It's one of those things that seems like something a 12-year-old will come up with. A very convenient way to make something happen you want to have happen.
Well, and as much as I am saddened by taking away the expanded universe, there are some stories I'm fine with them taking away. And that's one of them, like, now, technically, from a Force ability point of view, I don't have a problem with it. I think through the Force, there's a whole lot of stuff that's possible. And like Palpatine says, the dark side leads to many abilities some consider to be unnatural, and he tells Anakin that. And I did kind of appreciate that about the expanded universe. So you got to see the Force in a lot of different aspects. But yeah, I agree. Like from a story point of view, I'm fine taking that out because part of that also, like I believe Luke went to the dark side, became his apprentice for a while, and then it was up to like Leia and Han to save him, and that's just it's kind of like the whole side story where unseen in The Empire Strikes Back, where Vader stops the blaster bolt with his glove. A whole series came from that about Darth Vader's glove being indestructible, and it was some relic thingy that a guy found and made you powerful if you wore it, and it's just like really, really.
Yeah, that's the biggest flaw to the expanded universe. I have to admit, is that it really was probably like the greatest collection of authenticated fan fiction in the galaxy. Like, it
Yeah,
was.
in some ways it was. Yeah.
There was a lot that was good in there. Like, there were some very talented authors and people who like storyboarded and really went to town trying to make a really good story that was believable Star Wars. But inevitably, you're going to have people who can write who will be put through and elected through corporations that are more interested in sales and less interested in storyline. They're going to have some really odd plot systems. Like, it's inevitable. And so, like, that was one of the things. Like, you really had to kind of go through with a fine comb and kind of pull out some of those little, like, oh, we're going to just toss that aside.
And I think I've mentioned before about how much I dislike the Yuuzhan Vong invasion era. And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
that's another one of those. I'm not really all that sad they took that out. It's interesting, though, because that also dealt with Han and Leia's son, whose name was Jason, and he became Darth Caedus. And he became a Sith Lord after that as a result of that experience. So it's interesting, like, you could almost say it would still fit in the storyline, but
Kind
I don't
of.
know. Ultimately, I would be fine. Like, as much as I like the expanded universe, I would be a lot happier if they just said everything previous to episodes 1, 2, and 3 is still canon, and then get rid of everything after 4, 5, and 6. And that I could be like, okay, I can handle that because there's so much good stuff from beforehand, and after there's some, but especially the original like Timothy Zahn series with Mara
Oh,
Jade
yeah.
and all that. That would have been so good to keep. Not to say, I mean, they could still. I mean, there's plenty of room for that in the timeline still. So why don't they just say it's still there? I don't know, but
You actually bring up a point that I actually like have to say I agree with because so who's the general who's the general that works with Kylo Ren? It's like
Hux.
Hux,
Yep.
General Hux, or is it Admiral Hux?
I think it's Commander Hux.
Commander Hux. Okay, so I actually heard from another group of people who were kind of talking about Star Wars. I heard, and I actually think I agree that they, although they didn't want to include too much from the expanded universe, I think they really missed like a really good opportunity. Because how easily could it have been to replace Commander Hux with Grand Admiral Thrawn?
I know. It's like, well, but he also fills a very different role though, because Grand Admiral Thrawn was kind of the main head guy in charge, whereas Hux is he's a he's a pawn basically. I
That's
actually
true.
looked it up too, and it is General Hux. So
Like a General Hux.
clarify that.
It's like, I mean, but that's the thing though. Is like, I mean, they've already stretched obviously stuff. Like, it wouldn't be too far of a stretch to include that character, maybe in a different role. But
Uh
he
huh.
was such a fantastic character. But maybe that's intimidating in itself. I can understand it could be difficult approaching like such a cult classic character that pretty much any Star Wars fan that's ever read the books, any books that have been published, have been fans of him. It's like it can be intimidating trying to bring him into a cinema, and because a lot of people are going to not like it no matter what you do.
Yeah, well, those books too were, I believe, the first canonized novels to ever be published, and so
They were
to take those
amazing. That's
out, just
why.
yeah, and to take those out is just it's so sad. Like, who doesn't want to see Grand Admiral Thrawn played by Benedict Cumberbatch?
Oh,
I
I
mean,
know.
I just
It's
think
a
that
good
would be the most
picture.
brilliant performance ever. I mean, and I know people had mixed feelings about him as Khan, but take Khan, and that's Grand Admiral Thrawn, basically.
Oh, no, no,
Like,
no. Better though. I actually think Moriarty is a better comparison. Is Grand
that's a
Admiral
good
Thrawn.
comparison too.
Because like Grand Admiral Thrawn, like his hallmark about the whole thing is the fact that he understands people. Like, he
Uh-huh.
understands how people act and will react, and so all his plans are like extremely like calculated and manipulative, where he gets people to act the way they normally do. Like, he causes sabotage that can be blamed on other parties. He kind of breaks up old alliances that have been pretty strong up until that point, and then he strikes in critical places at critical times.
Uh-huh.
And he also he understands things like the superiority complex of the Empire was a very big flaw, and he changes that.
Right. And who doesn't love an evil genius? I mean, they're just so fun to watch.
I know, and like he and himself is like he's just like he was a pleasure to read. Like every time you got to the scene with him, it was one of the better scenes in the whole book, and it was always fun to see how well executed his plans would be because everything would follow a very logical train of like events that would just make a lot of sense. So like I wish they could have brought something like that into the series. It would have been really fun to see that character be brought forth, but kind of a ship that was missed.
Yeah.
Um, And then I guess another one I want to say is for anyone who's listening, real quick, we're speaking specifically about Timothy Zahn's book series. I think Hand of the Emperor is like one of the first ones.
Heir to the Empire.
Heir to the Empire, that's right. Um, Heir to the Empire is probably the one I recommend you pick it up and read it. I mean, it's not technically canon anymore, but that series itself is one of the best Star Wars books you can ever read. So, and in pretty much in every character that's introduced that's not already like a pre-established Star Wars canon character are all the characters that everybody loves, and I wish all of them could be brought into the modern universe. Like Mara Jade. Mara Jade is the bride of Luke Skywalker. She is probably my favorite Star Wars character just because I like her story background as a Force sensitive who wasn't trained as a Sith but trained as like an assassin, and so she like could use her Force abilities, but she was very restricted in how she was taught about them. And then I love how she has her story about how she lost her entire life when the Emperor died, and so she made it her life vendetta to someday track down and kill Luke Skywalker. And then the way they end up meeting and having to work together to survive, and how she eventually becomes indebted to him and eventually has to face like her old past and like realize that the Emperor was really a bad guy despite the fact that he took care of her and raised her and taught her everything she knew. And just like the character arc itself is just so fantastic. I can't get over the fact that it sounds like we're never going to see a Mara Jade character, and it's really sad.
Thing I like about Mara Jade too is reminds me a lot of Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, in that they're not necessarily a bad person at the beginning. They just don't know anything else. That they're going off of all they know, and then they go through a long and painful process to kind of see the truth about it. And in the end, they're great. And I love characters like that.
Well, those are the best kind because I mean, as much as people would like to be the Lukes and like Luke's not even a good example. Like we all want to be awesome characters, the heroes, the champions of justice and good. I feel like I mean we can talk about how cool evil people are, but I mean majority of us definitely agree that it'd be really cool to be somebody who can make such a big difference and for good.
Uh-huh.
But I feel like we actually have more in common with the Mara Jades and the Zuko's because we feel flawed and we feel like we make mistakes all the time. And so to see these characters that make those mistakes and then overcome them is more of a hope-filled story for us. And I think that's why we have a fascination with good, evil characters. Like, I don't know how to explain that better than that. It's just a character that is evil, but not just for the sake of evil, but more for the fact that, they did the best with what they had, and then they go with that. Like, we can bond with those type of villains because we see a lot of ourselves in them. And that's a powerful tool of writing and something that I think isn't used enough.
I agree. Because I think just seeing a villain is just evil just because they're evil. Like, they're such a one-sided villain. And I love the First Order for that reason because I kind of get the sense they all believe in what they're doing.
Yeah.
They don't think it's flawed. They don't think they're evil. They honestly view it as they're doing the correct thing to try to restore what the Emperor lost.
Especially, what's his name? T.R. Ader.
Oh yeah, TR Ader. There's actually a backstory for him now, an official one, which is great.
I know, it's just awesome that it's one of those things like we're seeing a repeat of history. Like the whole birth of the expanding universe began with like super fans who would lock onto some like character that's in the background and be like, "What's their story?" and come up with something interesting. And like we're already starting to see that again. So I have a funny feeling that we're going to see a birth of a whole new expanding universe. And who knows? Maybe this will be like us watching a generation of 10,000 years of Star Wars history being written from the new perspective of the new movies.
Yeah, I still kind of resent the fact, though, that knowing there's going to be two timelines just makes me...
Oh, come on, though. I mean, we can't be too mad because look at comic books. How many... They have literally canonized they call it the multiverse now. They have multiple dimensions And the dimensions will sometimes cross each other. Like they'll purposely write a dimension that's different from the previous, where they get like start at the beginning, and then for the big conclusion, they'll like have them swap with other dimensions from previous like iterations of the same stories, and they're rehashing over and over and over again all these superhero stories, and the hardcore fans are still okay with that.
But it's a completely different genre, and Star Wars has never had any amount of that or time travel. I mean, okay, there's been like I can think of one or two exceptions to that. Like there's a creature called the Waru that kind of pops in a weird time in the timeline. It's one of those things I'm kind of glad actually got out now that I think about it. But I just that's one of the reasons I've never gotten into like superheroes, Marvel, DC, that kind of stuff. Just I can't stand that, honestly. I'd rather have one character I can relate with their good and bad, instead of just pick and choose which version of this character you want, and it's still true.
That's true. It adds a lot of like just ambiguity and kind of tries to, I think it's pleasing everybody, and in that way it kind of pleases nobody.
Well, especially now too, how they're like, hey, now we have another version of Thor who's a female for all the feminists, and it's just like, I'm a full believer in equality, but like, it's ridiculous when you bend over backwards to try to make everyone feel equal. It goes back to that millennial mindset of participation trophies to me. Just
Well, the one thing I can say for that is might be that like if you look at Thor not as the name of a specific person but as a title, then it makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's never been established to me whether or not that's the case. But if that is the case, then I think it's fine. But I kind of agree with you that if it's like a whole new version of Thor the character, but now as a female, it's like maybe seems a little like pandering. And I don't know. It's odd because one person will call it pandering, one person will call it brilliant. That's the nice thing about opinions. We're allowed to disagree.
How dare you disagree with me? I'm just kidding.
How dare you? I think that reminds me though of like we're talking about alternate realities. I actually saw a picture that was like the caption I think on the top of it was like if the roles were reversed, and it shows like a picture of Ren standing in like black clothing. So not Ren, Rey. When I say Ren. So Rey standing in black clothing, and her staff's been like converted to a double-bladed red lightsaber, and then it shows Kylo Ren with a blue lightsaber with the like the special hilt, and it's just like, it's interesting. It's like it's kind of fun to see that kind of concept already out there.
Like I'm fine with spoofs like that, but as soon as they make it official canon, that's what I have a problem with.
Oh yeah, okay, I can see that.
Speaking of those, though, I saw this other picture that it had Kylo Ren standing in the snow. It's a shot that was cut out of the movie, but he's standing in the snow with two stormtroopers behind him, and he's wearing Queen Amidala's headdress. And it said, in an alternate universe where Kylo Ren admired his grandmother instead of his grandfather.
That would be awesome.
That was just, oh man, it made me laugh.
All right, so we've been doing lots and lots of talking about like what's happening in social media and such, but let's start getting to the nitty gritty of like the movie again. So I wanted to hear more about what your opinions are about Snoke, because we kind of touched on like what other people are saying, but I want to know what you said, because you said you had some theories about this.
Yeah, so there's one of the main ideas going around out there about who Snoke might be is that it's a possibility he might be Darth Plagueis. Now, I personally really love that idea for a lot of reasons. I would be surprised if they did it, but I think there's a lot of reasons why it would be neat. First of all, you have the whole thing about Darth Plagueis being able to influence the midichlorians, which thank goodness they'll not refer to them ever again, probably. But he could use the Force, I'll just say, to create life and to stop people from dying. Now, Palpatine does mention kind of smugly that he could stop others, but he couldn't save himself. Well, how cool would that be if Palpatine was dead wrong and he could not kill his master and he came back? And he's extremely deformed. Now, Darth Plagueis has been confirmed in the canon that his species is immune. I think that's how you say it. It's a Muun. Essentially, it's the species that you see for the leaders of the banking clan in Episode 2 when they're meeting with Count Dooku. The leader's name is San Hill, but he's the one who has kind of like the snivelly voice and the really small, or really like long and squished-looking head.
Yeah.
And that is the species that Darth Plagueis is, and that has been verified. So, it doesn't exactly look like Snoke, but at the same time, if it is Plagueis somehow, we know that he has been probably severely wounded and injured from Palpatine. And so you could almost say that it could be him. I would be surprised if they took it that far, but I think from a plot point of view, it has a lot of neat things about it. I believe Andy Serkis had a statement somewhere. I don't remember details, but essentially I believe reading somewhere that Snoke is about 7 feet tall. behind the
Oh
scenes,
wow.
and I remember reading something about he uses a quarterstaff in combat. That, all could change because we haven't actually seen that yet. But initially, that's kind of what we know about him. Now, I don't know if Munes are actually that tall, but I think that they definitely could be. We just don't know a whole
Interesting.
lot about him. So I don't know. I think it would be neat. And also, I mean, what that would mean is you think about the rule of two that Darth Bane initiates about 1,000 years before we see the movies. The rule of two basically is that there's one master and one apprentice, and he has this really neat line. I'll probably slaughter it, but it's essentially you have two people, one to embody the power and the other to crave it. And so the thought is there, you have the master and the apprentice. The master is the embodiment of the power. He is the guy in charge, and the apprentice is there to crave it. And essentially, they have this agreement or this understanding that if the apprentice ever becomes powerful enough to take out the master, then he has the right to rule, and the master doesn't anymore because he's gotten weak. And so it's this interesting twist where you have to work together with this apprentice, knowing that one day he's going to try to replace you, and that he fully deserves it if he can.
Yeah.
And but
I,
it brings up the point that if Snoke is Plagueis, then he would have been alive at the same time as Palpatine and Vader and Count Dooku and all these other Sith Lords, and so what was he doing the whole time? And I kind of think it would be really neat if it turns out if he survived, he sees Palpatine what he's doing. He kind of thinks Palpatine is kind of an idiot, an impulsive little jerk who thinks he can do everything. Because as far as the ancient Sith Lords go, assuming the expanded universe has some truth still back there,
mhm.
Palpatine is kind of a wimp. His power is in the politics and not just the raw force abilities. And it would be very interesting to me if they end up putting Snoke in some other role linked back to the original trilogy. For instance, we know the movie Rogue One is coming out this year,
Right.
and it's the story of how the rebels find the Death Star plans. Well, I think it would be really neat if somehow in the background Snoke is the person leading them to the plans the whole time.
Ooh, that is an
To kind of,
interesting theory.
yeah, to stop his apprentice to get him out of the picture, essentially. Now, like
Huh.
I said, I would be very surprised if they actually did that. But from a story point of view, I think it would be so cool to do something like that. Not only that, but it would link the new movies back to the original trilogy, or the prequel trilogy, which I know a lot of people don't like and they want to forget about. But they're still part of Star Wars. They have some great story points, and so
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be such a cool link. But I don't know. I think that would be cool, but I would be surprised if they did it.
Well, it brings up some very interesting points because one of the things is I don't know if this is true, but I heard somewhere that there is something in like that was canon outside of like the TV shows and the movies. Like I think there were a couple things they did say were canon. One of the ones that might be was a book that came out not too long ago that was it's called, I think the title is Darth Plagueis, and it's
That
like
one is
about him.
actually that one is canon, yes.
Okay, that's interesting. I read that book, and there's a lot of very interesting points to it in there because it does talk about Plagueis and how he overcame his master and like what happened there, and talks about him finding Palpatine, and like he went for a long time without picking an apprentice because he wanted to pick someone who was right, and he find Palpatine, and you start training him and such, and Palpatine before he betrays him, like is always talking about how like the order of two is old fashioned and how the Sith should be able to rise up now, but the Jedi are weak and they have a good opportunity. And Plagueis is like, well, yeah, but we'll see. Let me continue working things in order because like they've been building up for this big like reversal of power and turning everyone against the Jedi and destroying the Jedi and then the Sith rising up. Like it'd been in the works for about 1,000 years,
Uh-huh.
and Palpatine wanted to pull the trigger because he felt like they were ready. And Plagueis was like, no, we wait, especially because he wanted to do his research on life, his life-altering force powers. And in the series, Palpatine actually strikes him down and then initiates a plan that was kind of against the flow. And he starts kind of breaking the rule of two, where he has Darth Maul, but while he's training Darth Maul, he starts training Darth Tyrannus or Count Dooku. He starts training him independent, like before even Maul had died. He'd already started his influence on Dooku, because Dooku was kind of in on the plan since like around the time the clones were being made, which is 10 years before the events of the second one.
Uh-huh.
And then it also talks about in that book how Insidious, Maul dies, and then he has Count Dooku, who's kind of already there in a backup. But the whole time he's been working on preparing Anakin, which was one of Darth Plagueis's like little experiments. Darth Plagueis was messing with like that, and he wanted to see if he could make a life start independent of, the normal biological processes. And that's why, Shmi didn't have a father, didn't have a husband, never like had anybody that was his father in any biological sense. And that's what makes Anakin so weird. Kind of a Jesus Christ metaphor, which is kind of creepy.
Yeah,
but
and I think it's also... Oh, go ahead, finish.
As the last slide is that, if you're right, I actually think that the idea that he could be Plagueis is very credible, because if Plagueis, who is a very, very patient, very, very like long-term thinker, was defeated by Palpatine, like he would take time to recover, and I'd assume he'd probably be fairly weak from then on. Even if he could recover himself, he'd probably be very, very weak. I could see him taking the back seat and saying, well, Palpatine might have won in the short term, but an understanding of the Force is something he still doesn't grasp, not entirely. I'll just wait, and his demise will come. And he does die, and then Plagueis kind of comes back to reestablish the rule of two.
Right. And I think it's neat, but it's also interesting because we notice Kylo Ren does not have a Darth title. He kind of... Ren is his new title, and I wonder if they're ever going to go back to the Darths, or if he's just not worthy of the title yet, but it'd be interesting to see if they go that route. I think it'd be cool.
Well, if he's Darth Plagueis, then I bet when we'll get a Darth title, but if he's not, then they might step into a whole new version, because that's another thing. We don't know. It sounds like Luke hasn't been training anybody. He's just going to, like, after his fiasco and his students were all massacred, he kind of sounds like he's gone into a retreat, which is an odd choice for him. I want to see how they justify that, because that doesn't feel like the Luke Skywalker I knew. Yeah. But then, moreover, if this new guy obviously has trained Kylo Ren somehow, he's trained Kylo Ren with the dark side, are they training more? Like, are they planning on making a bunch of Dark Jedi, or is that all the training they've gone to? Like, are both sides so stagnant now that there's really not going to be more than one or two Jedi or Sith at a time?
It's interesting I'm interested to see more what the Knights of Ren are, because we see them just briefly in Rey's vision in the movie, but we still don't really know, like, are they Force users? Are they Dark Jedi? I personally think they've got to be. I think they kind of probably came from Luke's students, but that's just something we don't quite know the full details yet on what they are. But it'll be very interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of potential. Once again, like, I kind of back to where I was before I saw Episode 7. Like, before Episode 7, I was so worried because it's like, it has so much potential to be so awesome, and I'm like terrified it's gonna suck. And then it kind of like The Hobbit. I mean, the Lord of the Rings trilogy was incredible, beautifully done, fantastic. And then I watched The Hobbit, and I was like, I don't know. Like, I didn't like it very much. Like it could have been more, it could have been better, and it kind of felt like it fell short and was trying too hard in a lot of ways. So I was terrified Star Wars was going to do the same thing, where it was going to like be almost too try-hardy. And as far as Starkiller Base goes, we've already covered that kind of did do that. But in almost every other way, it's been doing fantastic. So we'll see what happens, but I'm starting to get that worry again that, like, we're going to start diving off the deep end. Because Star Trek, J.J. Abrams' pet project of Star Trek, the first one was fantastic. It was different from the original concept, but it was similar enough that the twists and turns that came up were forgivable. But the second one came out, and besides the fact that Colin was a great character, the rest of that movie really kind of sucked. And I was very disappointed. So I'm almost not even excited about the third Star Trek. And so, like, I'm terrified that Star Wars will start off with a good, strong start. Second movie will be kind of disappointing, and then I won't even care about Episode 9.
Yeah. One thing that does kind of encourage me, though, is the script to Episode 8 apparently is so good that J.J. Abrams regrets not directing it. Which, I don't know, I talked a lot in the last podcast about my problem with J.J. Abrams as a director. He has a lot of things he does just almost like it's just him and his company just do these same things over and over. But, I do think he's a good director.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, we'll see if he thinks it's a good script. We'll just see how this guy can pull it off. Now, this other director, like, I don't know his name because I don't really follow directors and whatnot, but talking to my coworkers about it, apparently he's directed a whole bunch of other movies. Like, there's one called Looper and other stuff, but apparently he directs these movies that are kind of weird.
Yeah.
And so I haven't seen any of them, but it makes me a little nervous just knowing if he's that kind of director, we might have some weird abstract stuff in the next movie, which, I don't know.
We'll see. The nice thing is that of all things I can count on, I feel like Disney is a good safety net. I feel like with like the way they've handled the Marvel universe. I mean, they've kind of had questionable directors for a lot of those movies too. Like Ant-Man, like it kind of changed directors halfway through, and they didn't even know if they were going to get published because the director was hard to find. But that movie turned out good, and so I feel like Disney, besides becoming like the fastest growing empire in the world,
Yeah.
Disney tends to take care of its I don't know what you call it, its trademark, its copyright material.
Right.
So if they have the safety net of Disney, I feel like they might be able to pull this off okay. Like the bad directors or the weird directors can be kind of reset on the path. Because I mean, you can walk, like if you don't like what the director's doing, you can walk up and say, "Look, we can find a replacement for you in like 30 seconds." I have a line of 20 other directors who are dying to be where you are right now. So how about we clean this a little bit and take away some of the weird stuff?
Right.
Let's see. So we've talked about Snoke a little bit. I like the whole Plagueis theory. I haven't seen or heard of any other theories that really make sense to me.
As far as Snoke goes, yeah, I don't know a whole lot about him. Now, I have heard a couple interesting things about some other characters, though, mainly Rey and Maz.
Okay, what are those?
So, first of all, the one with Rey, there's a prevalent theory out there. Now, first of all, the movie seems to hint heavily toward her being a Skywalker, which is still personally my opinion. But there's another theory out there that's very well written and very well thought through that she could actually be a granddaughter of Obi-Wan Kenobi.
That is an interesting thought, but like, I don't know. It kind of brings into this question again of like, who would the mom be in that situation? Because Obi-Wan pretty clearly goes from Jedi to renegade to old man living in the mountains.
So that's my problem with the theory. Like, I think some of the other points they make are neat, and it wouldn't be really cool to kind of see the juxtaposition of the Skywalker and the Kenobi family kind of, you go through the original 6 movies and it's all about the Skywalkers, and then here comes episode 7, 8, and 9, and it turns out like, oh, now it's a Kenobi that's a link back to the past, but kind of, the Skywalker line has been very unstable, really.
Yeah.
But it would be neat to see the Kenobi line come back in so strong and pure, and I don't know, we'll have to see how Rey turns out if she is a Kenobi, but yeah, it'd be cool. But my couple problems with it is, like you mentioned, Obi-Wan Kenobi is like the poster boy of the Jedi Order. He's like the perfect goody-goody two-shoes man who like obeys all the rules, who does everything according to the council, and he's in very good standing with them because he's just a super obedient little guy. And, he's awesome. Well, everyone loves Obi-Wan. But because of that, that's why I don't think he'd go have a kid. Because he held to those rules and those tenets of the Jedi Order so strongly, I don't think he would go and throw those out the window when he was just living by himself. Even in an emergency situation where it's like, we don't know if the Jedi Order is going to survive or whatnot, I don't think he is that obsessed with the Jedi Order, like other Jedi like Mace Windu seem to be, that he would go and break his training just for that. And so if they were to go that route and say it was offspring of Kenobi, I would be very disappointed because it puts a huge black mark on his character as we know it so far.
That's true.
So that's why
they could come up with a reason for what happened, but they'd have to kind of stretch it a lot because, like, once again, you'd be going back on his codes, you'd be going back on like a lot of stuff, and then he'd be abandoning his child, or maybe he didn't even know he had a child. But it's still like that's kind of like a thing to have for Obi-Wan because he really is. I like how you said like the poster boy of goodness. Like
right.
That describes him well.
And there's a couple other points in the article that were very well thought out, but I don't think are necessarily true, is they mentioned how she's obviously strong in the Force, and so is Obi-Wan. But yeah, he's not that strong in the Force. He's, an average Jedi compared to the Skywalker line, which, as you mentioned, being the experimentation of the Sith Lord, they kind of are artificially imbued with great power. And so having Skywalker genes would make a lot more sense for Rey to pick up on stuff so quickly to me. The other point is they mentioned she picked up on the Jedi mind trick so quickly, and that was like Obi-Wan's main trick. That was his expertise. And I think, okay, yeah, we saw him use it, twice in the movies?
Yeah,
sure.
They were done well, but it was twice.
Right, and I think that's a stretch to say that's his little handbag trick or whatever. No, I think that's kind of a stretch, but I don't know, it's not too beyond possibility, and I think it would be neat if they linked her in somehow, even if she was some relation to Kenobi, not being directly a descendant or something. I think it could turn out quite good. But I personally still see her as a Skywalker, but we'll just see what happens.
We will. It's interesting, though, like to bring up a lot of this, because like, it's fun to me to think about like people talking about like, oh no, the lines of the Jedi are going to die out. we're talking about a Jedi Council and an order that, at least for the past 1,000 years, probably longer, have their tenets and the way that people are trained is that from a young age, before they could be too impressed upon, they're brought to the temple, isolated from their families, and taught the Jedi way, so the master of their minds. And then they're given a code saying that they're not allowed to have any real relationships, so they can focus on their duty. If procreation from Jedi to Jedi and their descendants were the only ways that you could have sources of the Force, within 1,000 years, there would be no Force users anyway. Yeah. So obviously, you've got Force tendencies can kind of pop out of nowhere. It's kind of cool how it can fall in families, but ultimately, that's not necessary. And then I also have this really interesting thing: is you'd think after so many years of the Jedi being wiped out, and no real Force training happening to the point where the Jedi themselves have become stuff of legend, as Rey, Finn, and Han Solo talk about, how they didn't even think the Jedi were real; they thought they were just stories. So there must be tons of Force users out there who just have no clue that they have a connection to the Force. There's got to be tons of them. So I mean, what's happening to them? I kind of goes back to my point before. Is anybody trying to teach these people, or are they just going to literally let all this kind of just vanish away and not be a thing anymore?
Yeah, and that brings up another question that could either be a plot hole or an interesting link back to the history of the Sith and Jedi, and that is the First Order is trying to find Luke to destroy the last of the Jedi. Why are they obsessed with Luke being the last of the Jedi when there's got to be, like you said, thousands, millions, billions of people with Force potential out in the galaxy? Why are they not pulling a pharaoh and hunting down all the children and killing them off, As opposed to, why are they searching for Luke himself? Why do they view him as such a threat? And if you go back to the history of the Jedi and the Sith, depending on what they decided to keep from the expanded universe, they're so obsessed with each other. It's kind of frustrating how obsessed with each other they are. They don't really seem to care about the galaxy. It's all the Jedi and the Sith, and both teams are at fault here. And it's interesting when Anakin finds out who Palpatine is. He says he's the Sith Lord we've been looking for. What does Mace Windu say? He says, we've got to act quickly if the Jedi Order is to survive. He doesn't say anything about the Republic. He doesn't say anything about the galaxy at large. He just says, we got to protect the Jedi.
Oh, heck, they even mobilized to go and secure the Senate. Politically, that's a horribly weird move for the Jedi to make. It's we found the Sith. Quick, send a bunch of Jedi to the Senate. It's
yeah. And
what were you expecting to have happen?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Apparently his motivation, too, is just to protect the Jedi. And the Sith are the same way. They have this obsession with one another that they don't really get anything done except the whole galaxy suffers at their expense for thousands and thousands of years. And it's like two siblings having this fight between themselves, and then the extended family has to hear it all the time. It's just... And so it'd be interesting if that's why they're searching down Luke, is because of that link back with that obsession with each other.
That's sad.
It is, but I mean, that is kind of the history of the Jedi and Sith up to this point, depending on if Snoke is a Sith and all that.
You kind of bring up a point, and when I would read the things like the Timothy Zahn book, and when they had the idea of Jedi that could get married, the relationship between Luke and Mara became one of probably one of my favorite love stories, just because they complement each other so well, and having all these kids, and I loved reading the books later on about the Solo twins and Ben growing up together and attending a Jedi Academy and stuff. It almost felt like Star Wars Hogwarts. Some of those books are really fun. And the whole concept of these traditional family Jedi and being bolstered and strengthened by these Jedi who kind of just rose up out of their own families, and how they were allowed to grow up for a while and know their families and do that stuff. The new Jedi Order that was depicted in the expanding universe was such a cool, pleasant, and just awesome idea that was it was Luke got first caught up in trying to bring back the way the Jedi used to be, and then he had a lot of problems with that, people turning astray. He had people who were rebelling against him, and he eventually kind of wises up and kind of realizes that the old Jedi method died for a reason. And
it failed for a reason, yeah.
It wasn't Jedi were cool and they were good, but honestly, I'm happy that the old regime left. There was a lot of problems with it. If I lived in the Star Wars universe before the fall of the Jedi, I would be probably personally having a lot of issues with the way they do things. It's very cultish almost. they make the Jedi be almost like their own society, and to the exclusion of the caring of other societies in the name of keeping distractions away and being impartial.
Right.
But I mean, that's, I don't know. It reminds me of Tibetan monks. I mean, monks are amazing. They can attain such great heightens and self-awareness in their temples. But would we actually then want to bring them down and make them a policing force? No.
Yeah.
It's a big difference.
Unless you have the Shaolin monks, because those guys are awesome.
Yeah. But like, I'm saying in principle,
I know.
we're talking about like the idea that there's a big flaw to the whole Jedi society, especially after the vanishing of the Sith. They really became this kind of cancer that really wasn't helping as much as it was harming almost as much as it helped. And that's why it fell so ridiculously fast when the time came for the trigger of Order 66. Like Emperor said, kill them all, and the Jedi just obliterated because A, they were not prepared to be able to understand the true motivations of what was going on. They did not understand politics, which is why Palpatine became so powerful without them really... They didn't even notice that there was a problem until Palpatine was already ridiculously powerful to the point of like irreversibility. Right. And then when they do die out, it's like... I mean, I understand it's good to hold a tradition, but times change and people need to change with it. And so if you are right and it's still a whole Sith and Jedi battle going on here, like that will almost be disappointing because it's you're right, it's very obsessive and just it's an old dead horse. We need a new Jedi Order. We need a Jedi Order that's more relatable. We need a Jedi Order that's more like, I don't know.
Yeah,
more like Hogwarts.
Yeah. Well, I've always felt, too, that the old Jedi Order was very much, they're just mass-producing cookie-cutter Jedi that are extremely weak in the Force, and they can swing a lightsaber, but they're more of a symbol than an actual real, like, benefit to anyone. I mean, yeah, they're great, they're powerful, they led the armies, which is another weird thing. Why were they generals? They're not really associated with the Republic, they're just an ally more, but yeah, like, they were just cookie-cutter, mass-produced, and if you read the novelization of The Revenge of the Sith, one of the reasons Yoda exiles himself to Dagobah is because he's embarrassed. He has realized that he has been arrogant and prideful, and he's been training Jedi wrong for the last 800 years. And he realizes that he made a big mistake, and it's partially his responsibility that the Jedi Order fell. It's partially his fault because he was teaching them just, the little basic moves and little basic things, but he was not at all preparing them for what happened. And the Sith was in front of them the whole time, and he didn't see it, he didn't prepare the Jedi for it, and so they fell. And he realized that, and that's why he exiles himself, because he feels responsible, and he may have been in part.
And I think I read that book too, and I think Mace Windu also kind of had a clarity moment that happened to him right before he tried to arrest Senator Palpatine. I think he did a whole thing where he was like thinking to himself while they were on their way, and he talked about how he was realizing how unprepared they were for actually meeting a Sith. And he says that, like, I think I may be completely misquoting this, but I swear I read there in the book someone I think was thinking this, where they said, for thousands of years we've been training the Jedi to fight the Sith Empire of old, when we've never adapted to what the Sith have become now, and I don't know if we know how to fight them anymore.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because along that same train of thought, if they were to encounter the Sith of old, I don't think they would have stood a chance either. I mean, you think of all the Jedi that are alive in the movies, Yoda's the closest one to the ancient Sith, but still it was 1,000 years and he was only like 800-something years old at the time. None of the living Jedi had ever encountered a living Sith until Count Dooku came along. He's the first one they knew about. Well, I guess Darth Maul. They knew about him being a Sith, but other than that, fronted one. And so how do they even know what the ancient Sith were like besides just what they read about?
Yeah, exactly.
And it would be a very biased history because it was from their point of view, unless they delve into the Sith, information, which I think they would have been reluctant to do so because of the nature of what it is. But yeah, it's interesting, and I kind of agree. It'd be interesting if they continued that little dogmatic fight between them. But yeah, it's Luke's was supposed to be a breath of fresh air and kind of getting things back to how they should have been.
I also think there's a fundamental flaw of, if we're going to go into, I'm going to dip into a little bit of philosophy here with the Jedi, because I think that the tendencies of the Jedi are something that's actually prevalent in something I'm actually very much a part of now. I'm a religious person. I attend church every Sunday that I can. And, And there's a lot of expectations at church to be a certain type of person, to act a certain way, to do certain things, to hold responsibilities. And church is great. I mean, it's something that encourages you to be good. It has a lot of teaching, and regardless of your personal views on religion, it's something that I feel a lot of people, they make improvements in their life. But there's a fine line to the point where if your expectations of living a perfect life are so severe that even minor infractions become a major problem for you, you start entering this area where, like the Jedi, the idealism of being able to purge yourself of all emotion. I mean, it sounds good on paper, but in practicality, it really is what made the Jedi fall, because Anakin, struggling with his emotions because A, his wife was probably going to die because he'd seen a Force vision of it, B, his best friend and mentor outside of the Jedi Order turned out to be a Sith Lord, and C, he kind of figured out that he'd been being used as a pawn the entire time. That's a lot of strain and emotion on somebody, and to expect him to have just emptied his mind and just gone with the flow, that's a tall order, and so it makes sense that he made a mistake. And then he was so ashamed of making said mistake that he just decided to go all out on the bad side. Like,
Well,
and
yeah.
that's something I think I've seen in reality. I think there are people who held to a specific ideal, who have this a structure, whether it be Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, whatnot, you name it. There's a standard and an expectation and a goal you strive for. But if the expectation is so extreme that every time you falter, you are the proponent of shame, that people will treat you poorly, who will actively like degrade you effectively, through bullying or shunning or any of those types of social behaviors. That's the same problem that led to the destruction of the Jedi, which is why these stories are so great, because it reflects things that are real. And I really think that when people fall into that trap of trying to be so good that's impractical, when they can fail so bad they can become exactly what they're trying to avoid.
Right. And that's the most frustrating part for me watching episodes one, two, and three is just seeing that how it's like, Anakin, you are a self-fulfilling prophecy where you see these visions, and so in the very act of trying to prevent them, you cause them to happen. And it's like, stop, you just want to yell at him, like, oh my gosh. But yeah, and also, getting into the philosophy of the Force is one of my favorite things about Star Wars, because, being a nerd and all, it's cool. But um, kind of this whole thing with Anakin too. Like first, there's this story way back in the expanded universe, which I hope they bring back still, and I'll mention that every time I mention expanded universe. But there's this Jedi by the name of Ulic Qel-Droma, and essentially, like he goes out and he tries to learn about the dark side so that he can figure out a way to destroy it. Essentially, the
Okay.
Sith Lord at the time is Exar Kun, who's my favorite Sith Lord, and so he goes out and tries to learn about the dark side so he can learn how to destroy it and how to stop it. A very noble point of view and everything, but ultimately he falls to the dark side because that's just what happens. He becomes Exar Kun's apprentice instead of stopping him. And essentially, through all the story, he eventually gets his Force abilities ripped away from him because there's this Jedi whose name is Nomi Sunrider, who was a lover of his, and she found him and basically stripped his Force abilities somehow. And so he realized that what he had done, he realized it was wrong, and he went and he exiled himself to Renvar, which you see in video games. It's an icy planet. You see it in Star Wars Battlefront. It's the like the ice caves, very
Oh
cold and
yeah.
icy planet. But yeah, Ulic Qel-Droma exiles himself to that planet of all places. And he lives there by himself for a long time, just thinking he just made mistakes, there's nothing he can do to redeem himself. Well, here down the road comes, I believe, the daughter of Nomi Sunrider and finds him on Renvar and convinces him to train her. Now, he doesn't want to, and he resists a lot because he failed. He thinks he shouldn't even try anymore. But he eventually agrees and he starts training her as a Jedi. He doesn't have any Force powers, but he's able to teach her pretty well.
Right.
And so I think it is his daughter. So he trains her and everything, and then as the story progresses, this group of bounty hunters comes and finds Ulic Qel-Droma and they shoot him down. And when he dies, though, the interesting part of the story is his body vanishes into the Force like Yoda's and Obi-Wan's does, which
Right.
shows he became one with the Force. And now you think of all the mistakes he made. He became a Sith Lord, he had murdered and been responsible for the deaths of millions of people, and yet even he was able to be redeemed. And it's just interesting how that all happened because not anybody can just become one with the Force. It shows that he was completely penitent, like repentant of the mistakes he had made. He had gone through enough pain and suffering for it that he was able to come back. And I think it's just a really neat message for everybody. And I kind of like this whole point too. Like my main point I'm getting to is with Anakin's story. Now, I've already talked about how Anakin is, the result of dark side experimentation by Plagueis and Palpatine and whatnot. He had those tendencies toward the dark side. Um, and, he made a mistake based on all the stresses that were placed on him. He was never very popular in the Jedi Order. Everyone
Right.
didn't, no one really liked him. He was a child prodigy. He was better than everyone. He started training way later. He was arrogant. And, who would like him, really? And so he just struggled a lot, which I think a lot of us can relate to. But ultimately, at the end of Return of the Jedi, he becomes one with the Force as well. You don't see his body disappear in the same way, but you do see him appear next to Obi-Wan and Yoda, and it's kind of very neat. Like to me, the Ulic Qel-Droma story is really neat and a moving story, but it pales next to Anakin's story because here's this person who is essentially a dark side creation. He has all these tendencies toward the dark side. He is responsible for probably more deaths than Ulic Qel-Droma was. Um, but even he was able to be redeemed. Dark side experiment was able to be redeemed and become one with the Force. And I think that's such a strong story that shows of all the things just piled against him, even Anakin was able to fight his very nature and come back from it. And I love the story and all the implications it has.
That's true. I also really like that because that really seems like the story of the Sith and the Jedi, both sides are kind of like this. The Jedi stand for like being good at all times. The Sith stand for like destruction of the Jedi and like overpowering and ruling the galaxy. And then like I think what it really needs to become, if you're gonna be able to find what the Jedi should be about overcoming your flaws and acknowledging them, not ignoring them. That's really like the
Right.
beauty of the whole thing. And like you said, in those stories, that's what makes those so good. Is you can see the redemption, and I think that's what the story of Vader ultimately needs to kind of conclude. Like in Episode 9, we need to see, and maybe that's how Kylo Ren's going to really play in the role. Is we're going to see the establishment of the idea that the fall to the dark side is not permanent. And like the idea that it's permanent is something that is a tradition that needs to be got destroyed and gotten away of, because all people make mistakes. And so if we can understand and have the idea that like just because you can fall that doesn't mean that you're done. And like that'll be kind of cool. Like if that's the lesson they end up going for, I think they'll finally hit the nail on the head and like really make the whole series could feel like nice and tied up. Because the theme
Yeah.
of the series stops being the fall or the destruction. It becomes about redemption.
Yeah, and it's neat that he is feeling the pull to the light, and so it's showing even he realizes it's not permanent, and so he's struggling with this internally right now, and he's another one that I just love the concept of his character. There's a lot of stuff on social media about him being a pansy and whatnot, but I don't think so. I mean, people just didn't like him taking off the helmet, and I agree he was more menacing with it on. But you think about his character and how complex and fascinating it is. He's another Zuko character, which is another reason I love him because he's struggling so much with his decisions, and I honestly think we're gonna see him coming back in the end. I really do.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm really excited to see how this is going to play out because I still think the nice thing is we can talk about it all night, but ultimately the potential that we're having in this series is just fantastic. We get to have that joyous anticipation feeling of not knowing what's going to be happening and looking forward to it. I mean, it's kind of cool that we get to be adults, kind of living through what we experienced as kids. I kind of wish that I could go back in time and have seen the episode 4, 5, and 6 for the first time when they first came out in theaters. I feel like that
Mhm.
experience, coupled with like the level of technology back then, like there'd not been nothing like that before. Just it would have been fun, and it's like we kind of get to have that now. I mean, it's not the same, but I mean, it's really cool. It's still really cool.
Yeah, and I think it would have been neat too to go through the whole "Luke, I am your father" moment in the
Yeah,
theater.
that would have been
That
really fun.
that would have been cool. I can just imagine discussions like this happening after, like, wait, but he kissed his sister. Oh my gosh.
What the heck was that? No,
Uh,
that's
oh, that would be
amazing.
fun.
All right,
So
well, yeah,
one
go
other
ahead.
thing I'd like to mention. I know we're kind of late on time, but just getting to Maz real quick.
All right, no,
Um,
let's do it.
So my brother brought up this interesting point about Maz that I had not considered before, and it's still not verified, but I'm liking the idea more and more. So he called me the other day, and he said, "What if Maz is the same species as Yoda?"
See, that's the thing. Like, she definitely has the resemblance could be passable. Besides the skin color, like if it were
Well,
green, it would almost be obvious.
well, here's the thing. Like when he first said it, my initial reaction was, "Nah, that's just another one of those things grasping at straws or whatever." And so, just to kind of prove it, I opened up Wikipedia. I went to Maz's page to look and see what her species was because I was sure they'd had it written. She doesn't have a species on Wikipedia.
Right.
And so, just that alone, like no one knows what species Yoda is. Maz doesn't have a species. You look at her, and you could almost pass her as that species missing her ears. And maybe something happened to her ears. Maybe that's one of the reasons she's wearing that funny head thing, just to kind of cover that. But also I was thinking about the skin. I was thinking, okay, if she's a little more green, like Yoda and Yaddle, the two we've seen in the movies, then I believe it more. But then another thing occurred to me. You've played the game Knights of the Old Republic, right?
Yeah.
So we have Master Vandar on the Jedi Council.
Right.
His skin color is almost exactly the same as Maz's.
Ooh, interesting. Of
And
course, it's
so,
not canon, but that's a good reference point.
but yeah, like the more I look at Maz, the more I can see it's possible. She could be that species. She looks a little different. Like Yaddle was a female and definitely had the pronounced like lip lines like Yoda did, but Maz doesn't necessarily. But there's a lot of variations. So I don't know. It's kind of cool. Kind of
I
cool
mean,
to think
and
maybe it
she's
could
got
be.
the lifespan that would fit.
Yep, 1,000 years. She has force potential, which most of the known of Yoda species were force sensitive.
And going on skin, I mean, heck, we have a lot of different pigmentations in the human race, but obviously all the same race. I mean, obviously it
Right.
could be the same thing there. Like,
I don't
there's
know.
a
I
lot of
think it would be
potential to
cool.
that. I had never thought of that.
Uh-huh. I mean, it doesn't really have any implications for the story necessarily, just one of those little tidbits like, that would be cool.
Yeah,
I mean, it could also be another tie back to the original series that wasn't necessary, but I mean, it would be cool. It would explain a lot.
agree. Well, I guess are there any other major points you want to cover? Just we have been going a little while, but I do want to make sure we get everything out because next week we are going to be moving on to a more general podcast. So, any other Star Wars stuff, let's get out now.
Okay, well, one other thing then, I was hesitant to bring it up because it might turn into another long discussion, but
Now let's dive into it, man. Let's
all
do it.
right, I'll try to keep it short, but it kind of deals with the expanded universe again.
Go for it.
So I mentioned before how I wish they would bring back all of the previous expanded universe, like pre-movie stuff, and how it doesn't really conflict with their current story. Like even if they have to get rid of all the after Return of the Jedi stuff,
Right.
like at least the before stuff they should be able to keep. But one of the big problems with that is if you watch the Clone Wars animated series, the last and final season almost seems like it was entirely written around this idea to pound into the viewer's head that there's no such thing as Force ghosts.
Oh,
And
okay.
it kind of drove me crazy for that reason. It's like every episode, it's almost like they mention every time there's no such thing as ghosts, there's no such thing as force ghosts, no one can come back, blah, blah, blah. And they mention it so often, I'm like, all right, this just sounds like propaganda. Thank you, George Lucas. So I just,
It's
if
like
they
his
could
last
just,
ditch effort to get something important in.
I know, that's what it felt like to me. And it was even a shorter season, too. So it's almost like they just tacked it on the end. They're just like, hey, we got to hurry and make this point so we can do stuff. I don't know. But if there was one thing that I want them to change about the official canon right now, it is that. Because, I mean, so I don't know if you have seen that last part, but the last series is really short, or the last season, sixth season. It's called the Lost Tales or the Yoda Stories. Not Yoda Stories, that's Lego. Anyway.
Yoda stories. This sounds like a little kid show.
Yeah, you can tell how much I enjoyed the Clone Wars as I can remember it so well. But oh man, I had problems with it. But anyway, there's a story arc where Yoda essentially is trying to find out more about the Sith and the Force and whatnot. And my first problem with it is he travels to the Sith homeworld to find out more. And what is the Sith homeworld?
Well, there's Korriban or Droman Koss. They both could technically be the answer to that.
See, and every single fan out there in the world would say one of those answers, I believe. But no, in this series, they decided the Sith homeworld is a planet called Moraband.
What?
And it's like, we've never seen this planet before, we've never heard of it, and Yoda goes there, and in the series, it looks identical to Korriban. And so why is it...
Ah,
Yeah.
stupid.
And so why is it Moraband? It made me so mad. And so I looked it up, and apparently George Lucas liked the name better, so he said make it Moraband. Anyway.
Okay, this is a
So,
good time to mention. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it. There's apparently a petition going around that George Lucas should sign on to be a co-director in the next 2 movies. I want to shoot whoever started that because it's the dumbest idea. Because I mean, look at the prequels. That's what happens when you let him have too much power in the story. He did brilliant in 4, 5, 6 because he was a co-writer and a co-director who ultimately had very little say. He just kind of brought everyone together. He was the figurehead. And then when he was in charge, it's like, I don't know, like he has this amazing ability to take his own work and just make it worse.
yeah. And so, like, another part, like this Clone Wars thing, another thing I just want them to get rid of so that we can have the expanded universe back is, first of all, there's the Moraband thing, which, I don't know, looking it up, people kind of seem to just say, like, okay, Korriban and Moraband are the same planet, just has 2 names. Like, okay, I can kind of take that. But the fact that he picked Moraband over Korriban because it sounded better to him, that's what bothers me about George Lucas. I mean, I appreciate everything he has done as far as coming up with the universe, but just doing stuff because he likes it better. Yeah, you got to do that as a director, but there's a point where it's like, we already have this story. Don't touch it, you know?
Yeah.
As part of that story, too, Yoda goes to this planet called the Force Planet. Dun, dun, dun. And it's in the heart of the galaxy, and apparently it's the planet where the midi-chlorians were born.
What?
And it's also
Oh my
the source of
gosh.
all. Yeah, this Force Planet is the source of all life in the universe. And
Uh,
yeah, there are these 5 Force entities that live on the planet called, get ready for it, the Force Priestesses. And they talk about how they're the link between the living force and the cosmic force, and they are shapeshifters. And guess what their 5 names are? Serenity,
oh.
joy, anger, confusion, and sadness.
Who birthed these unholy creations?
So yeah, this is one of those George Lucas Clone Wars things. Midi-chlorians and all that. So anyway, you can see what I have a problem with here. It's interesting though because it was in this whole like last little season thingy that they came up with the idea that Qui-Gon Jinn was the first and only Jedi to ever figure out how to come back as a Force ghost. And that seems to be the whole point of it, was just saying like there are no such thing as Force ghosts because Qui-Gon was the first one. And it seemed like George Lucas was just digging in his heels to say we don't have Force ghosts until Qui-Gon. For some reason, it seemed like obsessive with it. And so, but what doesn't make sense to me is on this Force planet, like, okay, so these 5 Force priestesses apparently teach Qui-Gon how to come back from and come back as a Jedi or as a Force ghost. Who are they then? Who are these 5 Force priestesses? If Qui-Gon's the first guy, then who are these? It just there's so many things that don't make sense about it, and
Oh
just
no.
I want to see this whole story get just completely axed and thrown in the trash so we can have back our expanded universe.
It's like, I mean, here's the biggest problem is like the Force is supposed to be part of the energy of the universe. Like it's almost like a natural consequence of life being there. Like that was
Uh-huh.
what made it so amazing. It was just the natural energy that life invigorates because life is tenacious, life is incredible, life is adaptable, and life seems to just press on when things should blow it to pieces all the time. And it blows
Yeah.
itself to pieces all the time. And so to try and give it this like deification, like that's like, oh no, it's from this like intelligence thing here. It's like it just, I don't know, it cheapens it for one thing, and then for another, it was poorly written to begin with. I mean, you and I are fans of Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson tackles the whole idea of consciousness behind powers, but he does it right because like we don't even know the whole details yet. But there's a huge difference between um, consciousness tied to power, but is like a natural occurrence of said power versus consciousness being the forced reason for power's existence.
Uh-huh.
That starts bemoaning just poor writing skills and poor like shortcutting and stage setting, where it stops being something that is slightly undefinable, like the sense of smell, a sense of taste. Like you can't tell somebody who doesn't experience those what it's like. The Force should be something very similar. But now it's
Right.
become this whole like, oh no, it's just this. It's just
Well,
midichlorians that come from a midichlorian planet with 5 weird ladies who could somehow make it all work.
yeah, well, there's a whole other thing in a previous season where Obi-Wan and Anakin crash land a shuttle on this, and I guess the Ahsoka, the apprentice that Anakin shouldn't have had because the Order wouldn't have trusted him with an apprentice. But anyway, that's a side thing. I mean, she's a neat character, but yeah, that. Anyway, so they crash land their shuttle on this gigantic floating force something or other called Mortis, and then there's this whole like 3 episode or 2 episode arc called The Ghosts of Mortis and whatever, and like there's this weird father who is the embodiment of the Force, and then he has a son who's the embodiment of the dark side, and a daughter who's the embodiment of the light side, and it turns out like his wife was apparently Abeloth, the dark side entity or something or other, and it gets so weird, and just like what. It just bothers me so much. But one interesting thing about this though is as a requirement to come back from the other side of the Force, it requires absolute selflessness, and that's how you have to do it. And so the only good thing I can see coming out of this is if they hold to that, then Obi-Wan can't have a granddaughter because he would have had to give in to selfishness to do it, probably.
Yeah. And what did Qui-Gon do that was so selfless? I mean,
he was a good guy. Qui-Gon's one of my favorites because of that. But I mean, I don't see him being extremely selfless. I mean, he fought for Anakin. He fought for things he believed. It wasn't exactly, maybe I don't think he fought for his own goals necessarily, but I don't think he just gave in to the whims of others all the time either. Which I know selflessness doesn't mean that, but what I honestly see this is, George Lucas is officially a Methodist Buddhist, I believe, is his religious affiliation, and I have the utmost respect for religion and for like the Buddhists. I love Buddhism, but I just kind of see this whole thing coming from George Lucas's religious beliefs, being like the Buddhists look for nirvana, which is essentially getting to a point beyond feeling good or bad. You're just kind of in a state of, you just don't feel, you kind of get beyond the earthly tendencies for anything. That it just seems like a very Buddhist type thing to bring this into it. So I don't know, I just want the expanded universe back so bad, but I feel like there's this dumb Clone Wars story that's just sticking in the way, because a lot of what happens in the expanded universe with the ancient Jedi and Sith is there are Force ghosts all over the place, and they're able to maintain their powers and abilities. And there's even a point when Yoda's on Moraband where he encounters the Force ghost of Darth Bane, but it's one of those points where he says, "You're not a ghost because they can't exist," and then Darth Bane's ghost disappears. That's like
okay, so I mean, effectively what we have here is George Lucas continuing to screw up his own canon while he had his grimy little sausage fingers in it, and it's just dumb. I think honestly, with Disney having it though, maybe they can tweak it, like maybe they can save it, because I mean they've got to understand that stuff's just kooky and weird.
Yeah, like George Lucas is officially not affiliated with them anymore, I believe. I mean, they were doing not what he wanted with the new movies, and so I think he kind of
thank goodness.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, George, if you're listening to this, which I highly doubt. If you're ever listening to this, though, understand we're grateful for what you brought to the table, but every time you've had a direct say in what happens, you created things that are just atrocious and are almost a sin against what the Star Wars has become. So yeah, we're not gonna say that we're sorry for our opinions. You better understand why these are our opinions, and hopefully in your next projects you can understand your mistakes and move on.
Gotta feel bad for the guy, because this is his little baby. He birthed it and he kind of developed what it is, and having I can't help but feel bad for him for that, but at the same time I can't help but feel happy if he's not gonna have
Steven. I don't feel bad for people who get called on social services. It's sad when your children get taken away, but there's usually a good reason for it. Right. And Star Wars has been in a home too long. We'll say that much. I am glad that it's moved over to its foster parents, the Disney Channel, and now it's going to become something better and have a chance at becoming a good thing.
Good way to think about it. But yeah, I'm kind of sorry to bring up this old downer subject at the very end here, but it's okay. There's so many parts of that I just want to disappear.
Ultimately, though, like the message that we have for this whole thing is, despite the flaws and despite all the stuff that we really miss, because I feel like that was the theme of this podcast, was more about like what we wish could be. But despite all of these things, I mean, our opinions of the movie are, bar none, the movie was excellent. It was fun. It had its flaws, but it was forgivable because it still brought us that joy and that like wonder that Star Wars is. We're looking forward to seeing what happens in the next two movies, and the splinter offs that are going to happen. And ultimately, if we can look past like the glaring miscalculations of George Lucas, we may still have something that 50 years from now people will still be watching, talking about, and enjoying. And if that's the case, I don't think there can be anything we could ask more for.
Yeah, I agree. It's and ultimately for me, the reason I'm such a big Star Wars fan is nothing to do with the movies and everything to do about the universe itself. So I think that, despite going away from the stories that were already there that we all know and love, may they rest in peace. I am very happy with the direction this new stuff is going because more Star Wars, and is a good thing if it's done right. And I think so far it's going pretty good. So
Yeah.
very excited.
So, you listeners, actually, you guys are really the future of Star Wars because the best part of the Star Wars universe, like Steven just said, came from the fans who got such interesting ideas that they were able to write, come up with stories that became popular and interesting and actually became canonized. We may be having people listening right now who eventually will become the carvers and the shapers of the new Star Wars expanded universe. So, I mean, listen up and let us all really just continue to fall in love with the Star Wars again, and let it hopefully we will one day be able to see maybe something even better. I mean, it's so sad that we're losing so much great content, and it might seem impossible that there could be something greater, but it's still possible. And with that possibility existing, it gives me a little bit of hope. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for being with us and listening to it with us at this point. This is a new podcast we're going to start doing weekly. It's called the Geeketeers because all the other creative names I could come up with were already taken. But we're very excited. It's going to consist of, at starting, of me, Steven, and my brother Landon. However, we hope to bring on a few more people on board. You're listening to this on my YouTube channel, TheBlueShifting. I hope you can leave a like and comment to let us know if there's anything else you'd like to hear about, especially in our next podcast. More importantly, hope you'll take your opportunity to share this with your friends and colleagues that they might be able to, hopefully get a good conversation started listening to this, and we can spark more interest in Star Wars and geekness in general. And until the next time you guys hear from us, we'll talk to you later.